so many fairy tales that we see, but like they're very Disney-fied, like they're very much like, oh, the princess is saved and she's nothing happens. But really, those fairy tales are still really, like, if you read the old ones, like they're so dark. And so I guess, why do you think, do you think fairy tales still have that power, even though, when I think of Cinderella, I think of the Disney one, not the like actual Charles Perrault one. Like, is that
Yeah,
is that is that
I
still a thing?
so with Cinderella in particular, and so I make an argument in my novel that a few readers have been able to catch on.
Mm.
Like I said, I always get really excited when people catch on to like my symbolism. But I make an argument in my novel that we never hear about the real mother. We always hear about the stepmother. And so that's the greatest tragedy of all, of never knowing what happened to these mothers. Are they missing women? Like, what happened to them? And so they leave behind these children never knowing who they were. And I think that's anguish. And so Cinderella speaks to that. I think Hansel and Gretel, it's a story about, the little boy and a little girl that are abandoned by their father and their stepmother. And then they come upon a witch's house who intends to eat them. And so Hansel and Gretel to me is a story about child neglect and child abandonment. Little Red Riding Hood, everybody knows like that one. And I think it's also not just about stranger danger, but like, child abduction. And we see that today. Like, there's human trafficking is a major issue that we don't, people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about these awful, horrific things. And then like Bluebeard, a woman that marries a man who isn't really who she thought he was. So it's like a story about deception. So I think, Walt Disney, and a lot of people may not know this, but Walt, like I live still in Hermosa. I'm like right in the neighborhood still.
That's where he was born or grew up, right?
Yeah, I could walk
Yeah.
to Walt Disney's birth
Oh my
house.
gosh.
And I didn't know that until recently. And so like maybe in like the last few years, but I remember in high school always be like, our claim to fame in our high school was the dad from Family Ties went to Covent Park, graduated from Covent Park. And I always remember thinking, wow, it's been such a long time. And like, who else has gone here? And so like, I didn't go to a high school I didn't, no offense, no offense to anyone, but I didn't go to Whitney Young. I didn't go to Lane Tech. I didn't go to Northside Prep. And it was always like, if you went to a neighborhood school, there was always kind of like this stigma that you probably weren't going to become something like those kids at those great schools. And so I always wanted to say, no, there's great kids at these schools and they're so amazing and so brilliant. And when I learned that Disney was right here, I was like, see, there's magic in our own neighborhood. The worldwide magic that we think of Walt Disney came from our neighborhood. So I always thought, I just love thinking about that.
And it's really interesting too, because as you're talking, I was thinking about like the idea of deception and how people you think are one way are actually another way. So like Bluebeard, she thought she was marrying, I don't know, a rich guy at a castle, and he turned out to be a rich guy at a castle who also murdered people. And Little Red Riding Hood, she was going to see her grandma, and her grandma is like a wolf, like literally the wolf in grandma is Moo Moo. So there's that layer of deception as well. And then I would think, oh, Disney, like, we always laugh and it's not funny, but Disney has like a whole stretch of like dead parents. So I guess it's maybe not as light as I would like to think. So like I said, I missed a little bit of it, but did you talked about the book a little bit, right? And or are we getting...
No, I can talk about it.
Yeah, let's get into the book because I'm really excited to talk about it.
So so Children of Chicago. So again, it's so I guess just a quick overview. So it's I call it either a retelling or an adaptation of the Pied Piper fairy tale told as a crime novel, so a police procedural, but it's also I love genre bending, so it's a crime novel, a mystery with a lot of horror elements, and then it could also be interpreted as a thriller as well because of the pace. I like to move my stories really fast, like you're kind of like disoriented and things are just moving along. So it follows a detective, Lauren Medina, as she tries to solve the case of a murdered teenager in Humboldt Park. And as she's going through the investigation, she starts learning about multiple teenage attempted killings and trying to piece those together and make a connection. And then they're all connected somehow through the Grimm's fairy tales. And so yeah, that's a quick quick overview.
One of the things that I really like about this, but I don't know if anyone in watching has had this experience, but I love reading books about Chicago. But when I read a book by someone who is not from Chicago and the elements don't come together correctly, it's very distracting. And that does not happen in this book. This book is very true to life. There's a lot of really great places, like the Newberry Library is featured, the Young Writers Program is featured, and I just wanted to know, it's full of also historical information. So why was the history of Chicago so important to include? You know, like you said, it's a police procedural. Usually there's not like a history section in it as well. So why was that so important for you to include in this novel?
I first, like I love the city. I absolutely, my dad came to so we're from Puerto Rico originally, and my dad came here, I believe he settled here like in the 50s or 60s, and this was home. Like the moment he said that he got here, this was home. It had its issues, and I've heard about all of the issues my father encountered here, but still, like even in its grittiness and even in the, I mean, my dad remembers the 1960s race riots and division because he was there.
Right.
And so even through all of that, I was always fascinated that he can still love this place. And I always remember growing up like, well, I'm going to leave once I can. But I just really came to appreciate the people. And we're some hardy people. We're like, and Chicagoans, we love really hard. And we have our issues, but I really feel like I can step out of this neighborhood and I can feel that I'll find my people, and there's just this, maybe it's the Midwesternness about it, but I know we're the nation's boogeyman because of crime, and I don't want to detract that and say that there isn't crime. I mean, last year we had 769 homicides. That's awful. But there's a lot of beauty here, and I wanted to be able to showcase that and make Chicago a character. And I wanted to show that we're not perfect at all, but there's so many fantastic things about this city that I don't think people realize. They see Chicago and they think gang violence, or they see Chicago and they think of pizza, or they think of Michael Jordan. But I'm like, Ray Bradbury lived out that, not too far. And like, we had, we have amazing writers that are from here, and artists and, engineers. The skyscraper was just, built here. And so I wanted, Walt Disney, Wizard of Oz was, part of it was written in Humboldt Park.
Yeah.
It was important for me to create a sense of place, but also make Chicago a character. And it's almost like the co-protagonist with Lauren.
I didn't think of it when I was reading it, but now that you say, I'm like, that is so true. Chicago is definitely a character in this book, for better or worse. And I get frustrated too when people try to make Chicago as like one dimensional. It's like, no, there's good and bad, and the people that live here like that dichotomy, and we're working to make it better. That's my hope.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some of the crimes and things that happen in Chicago. Are there any, and you already said that the Pied Piper story was a big inspiration. Are there any real life stories that contribute to it? Is there any real life influence that really struck you as you're writing?
Yes. Just thinking about all these beautiful kids that turn to violence because they feel like there isn't anything else to turn to. And I used to work in the educational talent search program at Roosevelt University. I used to tutor a lot of children. I mean, I was one of these kids. I was an inner city kid. I was almost kicked out of my high school because I wasn't a good kid. Not maybe I like to talk back. I think I was suspended like 10 times when I was in high school. And so I was that angry kid. I was that frustrated kid. I was that kid that was frustrated by poverty, by a lack of resources, by things that I felt were just not fair. And I see that with the crime levels affecting like really young people. And I mean, there's always been crime, but I think a lot of these amazing kids and like even like heroic stories of these children, I thought of like Blair Hope was a teen that was killed a few years back protecting one of his friends. And I just remember like, oh my gosh, like that was his first instinct to stand up and protect a friend. And, just a lot of these stories, I just kind of felt like they just kind of built up and I wanted to write about that somehow, write about kids that want to protect other kids and kids that kind of feel the lack of hope and that turn to violence. And so, because many do, and it's tragic and it's unfortunate. And there's a whole slew of issues about it that we can't solve right now, unfortunately, but I would love to solve it. And one of the reasons why I felt like it was important to live here, to stay living here, is because I wanted to be able to serve as a good role model to inner city youth, to say, you can grow up here and become an artist and write and do anything you want to do. Like, you just need mentors are amazing. That's what got me here. So having a mentor.
One of the things, and this is like a very small part, I won't say small, but it's a part of the book that really struck with me. Lauren, the protagonist, does try to help a kid in her own way. And she's definitely not perfect at it, and she definitely makes mistakes, but at the end of the day, it is appreciated. And so, it just makes you think you don't have to be perfect to help. You don't have to be a saint. You don't have to be like an angel. You can just do what you can. And so I thought that was my hidden message that I got from it. I was like, all right, I really need to get out there and do more stuff.
Yeah, she's a really hard character and she's very cold and very disconnected from people. And I think that happens. But even in that disconnection and that coldness, she still bonded with this kid and felt like this connection that I need to protect him. So,
is it hard to write a character like that? Is it hard to like have someone who's disconnected?
No.
Really?
For me, unfortunately. So her personality is modeled a little bit after mine. It's modeled a little bit after a few people that I know that are in law enforcement and in authoritative figures. And so I think a lot of it is from growing up here and being like on this constant level of having to protect ourselves. And I mean, I step out of the house and I'm always crossing the street or looking behind my shoulder. And again, it's not mayhem out here, but you grow up in a city and then you kind of develop this protective skin, this protective layer. And I feel like I wanted to write from that perspective. Like, when I'm on edge, what do I feel like all the time? Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's a sense of like, I'm trying to protect myself from other people more so than anything else. Yeah. And like, that's the vibe that I really got from Lauren. Like, I've been hurt, so I need to do things to make sure that like that doesn't happen anymore.
And that doesn't mean she's a good person. I mean, it doesn't, I kind of wanted to write, I like writing people that are complex. Like, you don't really know where they are. And like, can you trust them? Can you not trust them? And I like being able to write women that are just very sure of who they are. And I think especially, Lauren is a woman of color, and I wanted to be able to write this really, I mean, we see this in detective novels all the time. Like, we see these really like tough men and they're very like sarcastic and they just kind of go about their day. And so I was like, I'm going to write, I'm a Puerto Rican female, detective. And I know these women. I've met a lot of these women, and I'm like, they're tough. They're really tough.
So with that, with the law enforcement and things like that, it felt, not that I'm a librarian, I'm not a policeman or woman, but it felt like a procedural. It felt like Law and Order or something. And I mean that in a positive way. Like, it felt like there was research done into like the process and how these things happen. So did you do research? Did you talk to any law enforcement? Did you do research to try to see like how an investigation like this would proceed?
I have a lot of stories that have been told to me by people with law enforcement about cases that they've worked on. I want to be careful because I don't want to like give away who they
Oh
are.
yeah, no, I'm not gonna blow up anybody's spot.
I wanted to be able to like communicate those types of investigations with the information that I was told, and how again these people they're very cold and detached when it comes to these kinds of crimes. And I wanted to take that into account, and also take into account that I remember when I was writing this, my husband was like, "You're really going to write about a police officer in this day and age?
I did think about that.
Do you know what kind of trouble that you're stepping into?" And I said, "Yeah, I I am." Because there are police officers that live and breathe in the city and everywhere else. And so I wanted to write that, and some of the reactions, I think some of the most frustrated reactions from readers was that just that I chose to write a protagonist that was an officer, and that they felt hurt that I did that. And I'm sorry that, like, I understand, like, of course I understand, but I think if you read the book, um, you will understand why I did that. There's a lot of issues about trust that I bring up, and who can be trusted, and that back to that, and idea of deception. Like, what does it mean to be deceived by someone that you thought was there to protect you? And so I think that's one thing that I was trying to communicate. I hope it came across. I think it came across to some people about that. I don't want to spoil the ending, but I think it was important for me to say, not everybody that you think is here to protect you is really here to protect you. And that's hard. That's tragedy, and that's hard.
Yeah, it's really difficult to learn that. And I mean, for some people, it happens a lot younger. So, you've had to sit with this for a long time, or, you're getting disillusioned at such a young age. And it's really hard to see sometimes.
Yeah.
Was there any other research that you did that you really, I'm a librarian, I love research. So is there any other kind of research that you did besides talking to law enforcement? Or
so much, I love research. And
yeah.
I can just, like, there are a lot of writers, especially, I'm assuming horror writers, they're just gonna, they probably get this great idea. I'm gonna write about a monster that terrorizes a neighborhood, and they'll sit down and they'll plot it out and they'll go through a few edits. Not me. I probably will have, like, each book this book alone, there's probably 50 books that I researched, plus academic articles, plus other, materials. And so I really went pretty in depth, and fairy tale research, understanding like how those are constructed and why they are. I tried to write it like a fairy tale where some characters sounded flat, or there was like this flatness in some parts.
Yeah.
Some people were like, maybe it didn't come across, but I think the people that got it do. To feel like a fairy tale that you read, like the traditional Grimm's fairy tales. I did a lot of research on the Grimm's brothers themselves and how and why they went about. The original Grimm's fairy tale collection was the first edition was an academic text, and then they figured they could make money off of it. So then the second text was then more consumer friendly, and of course lots of research on the Newberry Library, which I love. The Newberry Library, and I think it's such a magical place. Greek mythology, because there is a character in the book that is influenced by Greek mythology, and so tons of research on Chicago history as well. I mean, it is such a fascinating city, and I think once you step back and you start researching all of these wild things that have happened in the city throughout its history, you start kind of like scratching your head, like, there's a lot of strange things that I'm sure other cities too, but there's just a lot of peculiar things that have happened in Chicago. And when I read about Chicago, or I watch Chicago in movies, I'm like, that's not we're not all hanging out on Michigan Avenue. We're like the tourist shop, and we're not hanging out in Old Town or Gold Coast. And so it was very important for me to write about this neighborhood. Like, no, what books are take place in Hermosa or Humboldt Park that aren't, that is just a story of genre with diverse characters. That was the story. It's just, I think that was very important for me to showcase it here in this neighborhood.
Yeah, and the one thing that always cracks me up is that I think a lot of us stay kind of in our little area. Like, I'm a South Sider, so I grew up on the South Side. So I have not got out to Humboldt Park as much as, and then when I did go, I was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know this was here. And so, I think there's lots of stuff in your book that will make people say, oh, well, maybe I need to check out that neighborhood, or maybe I need to go there and see the lagoon, because it's really gorgeous, and it's just one more hidden thing that the city has.
Like Garfield, Garfield Park Conservatory, like that's our, we're in pandemic right now, but I feel like usually in winter, every weekend, we're in Garfield Park at the conservatory with the kids. And so there's just these great places in the city where Chicagoans are, and that's something I wanted to be able to highlight. The west side's a great part of the city with amazing people and really diverse. Like, my neighborhood alone is 90% Hispanic, and it's like 35% immigrant. So there's just really fascinating stories here and cultures here, and I wanted to be able to talk about that.
What's one of the favorite stories that you found when you were doing your research? Maybe it didn't make it into the book, but maybe just something that you really were like, I really didn't know this. A real surprise.
I'm real a lot, but one of the things that I'm still fascinated, I need to find a historian because I'm just obsessed with the bronze buffalo at Humboldt Park, because the rumor is that they came from the World's Columbian Exposition. But I don't think it's true. I think that's just kind of like an urban legend. I like to think that, like, whoa, the buffalo and the garden, the formal gardens there from the World's Columbian Exposition. I mean, that was just, we learned a lot about that time in like undergrad at Columbia. So that's always curious to me. Like, I need to find somebody to like debunk it for me, just finally, and break my heart that no, they're not really.
No, I mean, you should keep believing. I think that there could be some Disney buffalo magic. I think that's allowed. When you were writing it, like, what was there a favorite? I know we don't want to spoil it, but like, are there like favorite parts that you really enjoyed writing? Were there parts that were really difficult? I'm really interested in the process, especially of a horror novel, which is so this is outside my comfort zone. So like, what was what was something that you really enjoyed writing? What was something that you were like, oh my gosh, this part, like, really curious?
Right, like writing the characters was really easy to me because I knew them. Like, in my head, I could see them, and they were all kind of, maybe not a specific person, but they were like groups of people. Like, usually what I do when I write something, I like write the idea down, like Pied Piper luring kids, and then I just kind of keep adding to that with different plot points, and then I try to make it interesting, at least for me, to be exciting. And so then that's when all the history and the research comes in. But for this, what I got like really geeked out was the fairy tales. And so there was like tons of fairy tale references in here. Like, the victim in the first few pages wore a red sweater, like Little Red Riding Hood. And later on, we see the red sweater again from the old woman. And so I kind of make a connection they're kind of like Little Red Riding Hood. The therapist with the golden hair in the tower, right? I say that the tall high rise building that they're in. I kind of make reference that that's probably Rapunzel. I make reference to Rumpelstiltskin. And so, like, multiple fairy tales, I went really in depth about, like I said, the stepmother and like the story and the tragedy about the stepmother. So those were for me, the most exciting, next to the Chicago history. That those were the two parts that I was just like so excited to write about. the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago Black Sox, who I think are so fascinating from
Oh my
1919.
gosh. Yes, I never knew anything about that. And then I listened to a podcast and I was like, this is wild. Like, it's just so bonkers.
Like, I had to cut that because I kept writing, and I'm like, oh, it's getting too long. I had to keep cutting it because it's just so fascinating to write about that. And then like, just the buildings that were like knocked down or no longer there. I didn't get to mention much about like the stockyards. I wanted to mention
Mm,
a little bit about that. What I didn't get to mention either was that Camp Douglas. We used to
yes.
have, yes, right, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I had a little bit on that, but it just didn't really fit. I was like, oh, this is a great piece of information that we had a Civil War camp here,
Yep.
where we kept prisoners. And I really wanted to embed that somehow. So that was like one piece that I kind of got like bummed out that I wasn't able to include. So there was just so many fascinating things. And then I got to mention Candyman, of course, but I think Candyman's fascinating because he's almost become like our modern day Bloody Mary, like he
Yep.
come 3 times. And so I wanted to, like, of course, I honor and I recognize Candy. I remember that was 91 when that first came out, or in the 90s. And so, but I wanted to make it more spread out across the city because
Mhm.
Candyman was very specific to Cabrini Green. And if you live in Chicago, you've learned that, a lot of those housing projects were eventually like, many of them were torn down over the years. And it's kind of tons of people were displaced,
Yep.
throughout the last few years. And so I thought about, well, what if there was an entity that was just all encompassing in the city? And that's kind of what I wanted to, that was one aspect of that idea. So,
I love and am terrified by the idea that like people are still making fairy tales. Like there are still these like urban legends that basically become like modern day fairy tales. And then there's stuff like online, like creepy pasta and like all that stuff that really makes the world very weird. And it's like, well, I don't necessarily believe in this, but what if? It's very creepy. And I never would when they had sleepovers, I would never do Candyman. Absolutely. Did you do that? I
I did.
never would.
I did
No.
everything, everything,
You
everything.
you could not come to my no, absolutely not.
I did. I did Candyman. I did the Ouija board. I did everything. And so,
No.
and my mom thought I was like insane because I would just like, and so I have a whole like the essay that that I'm nominated for Bram Stoker Award talks about like my exploration in the occult. Like I tried, like as a kid, I was just like, let's just go. And because I was always convinced that nothing would happen and nothing ever happened, And so, but it's this idea, like, I've always had like this curiosity of, I think ultimately about horror, what scares people about horror is the unknown. And what's the unknown? Like death. Like we don't know when we're going to die. We don't know what's death, what's afterwards is going to look like. And so I think was my interest in those types of things.
Mhm.
And that's what is my interest in writing horror, this whole idea of ultimately like death and the injustice behind it. So I think it's just this tragedy about people dying, people being forgotten after they've died,
Yeah, that's a
human
big one.
tragedy. Yeah, so
It's interesting because to me it also sounded like what you just said sounded hopeful. Like I hope that something does happen. Like it never did, but I kind of hope it does.
yeah,
Yeah.
I always hoped. It's my grandfather died when I was like a senior in high school, which is like the worst time. And
Yeah.
and I and I loved my dad's dad so much, and I just always felt guilty because I remember like the last thing I ever told him when I left Puerto Rico was like, I'm gonna come back and we're gonna hang out, we're gonna sit on the porch, and I always kind of stayed with that guilt, like I promised you I would see you again. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have that story where you say, hey, yeah, we'll catch up and I'll see you, and then you lose them, and so there's this anguish of, gosh, what if, or can they still hear me? And so there's this tragedy behind it. Oh, and my husband is an atheist, so he doesn't believe in anything. He's just like, you turn off like a nightlight, and I think that's so sad. But I never, I respect his opinions about it.
Right.
But I have hope that there is something. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, I guess, because I want to believe there's something beyond me. And so that also goes into my writing a lot, like this idea of I do hope there is something.
Yeah, it's really funny because I not funny, but I don't think of horror as like a hopeful kind of thing generally. But this book was hopeful to me. It was like we're doing this to make things better. We're doing this to help people, and in some ways, like in some ways the help is good, and in other ways the help is not good. But the goal was to improve in a way, and so I'm being very obtuse to try to not like spoil everything, but like and sometimes the improvement is good and it leads to good things and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's definitely true that I think the characters still allow with that.
And that's and I think, and to be honest, anybody going into it, hoping for like this great resolution, you might be disappointed just because I feel like we're still living and we're still here and we're still searching for resolution. And that's why I ended the book the way I did, because I feel like we're still here, we're still living in the city, we are still trying to find the right answers to address crime, the right answers to address poverty, the right answers to address why are there neighborhoods that don't have a grocery store. Like, it's so the solution is so simple to me in some instances, and so many of these issues that I see today are the same issues that we had in the 90s.
Yeah,
like
cycle.
And that's kind of why I also used Chicago as a historic device, because I wanted to make that connection. Like, we've never gotten over, we're a city founded on a massacre site from the massacre at the Dearborn. Mm-hmm. And so we're the indigenous people were massacred. They were eventually moved off, which those that were remaining. Then we also have the gangs of the Al Capone era. We have like this crazy history of serial killers that lived and killed in the Chicago area.
I was gonna say stockyards, but yes, also that too.
Like, stockyards, like there's still issues with the river.
Yes. I saw an article about that. I was like, really?
That's why it's called Bubbly Creek. It's like it's still like decomposing. Like, it's insane. Can you imagine? And then not just that, but like there are whole neighborhoods. There's like a neighborhood called Little Hell. That it was like, great poverty. There's just the area where UIC is, that was a neighborhood, and that was knocked down. All those people were displaced, a lot of it because of politics. But we have an issue in the city where a lot of people have been hurt continually. Mm-hmm. Haven't come to terms with it. Like, all we keep doing is pushing people out. There's of course gentrification is another issue that's going to be coming up in my next book, which isn't a sequel because this book ends here, but the next book is still Chicago. Is still the next book is we're still, it's like book 2 in the Chicago fairy tale series. And so we'll be talking about the issue of gentrification. Like, once upon a time my parents lived in Logan Square, like back in the 70s, and it's like there's no way they could afford the house that they lived in. Gosh, in the 70s, there, even the property taxes, they could never afford that. So
gentrification is so fascinating to me because you see what areas gentrify and which areas don't gentrify. So like Bronzeville, for example, people said that's going to gentrify for years and it still has not happened. And, there's talk of the Obama library and what that will do to Woodlawn. And, it's just so interesting. And by interesting, I mean frustrating, because it feels like there might be a rhyme or reason, but it's like not something that people are listening to. Yeah. I was gonna ask, and I feel like we've already answered, but like, do you think Chicago is cursed? Do you think what do you think? I have an idea, but
yeah. Not in the idea that a supernatural force is kind of like manipulating and pulling the strings. I think it's more the power structures at play that have kind of always remained in power. I mean, gosh, how long was like Daley, the Daley dynasty?
Yep.
Like
Two
running,
days, right?
like, right, yeah. Like I got a picture of my dad in Daley. Like, I'm like, what were you doing hanging out with Mayor Daley? Like there's just, it's a weird town. Like, and so,
Yep.
but the, I think it's, I think there's a lot of strange things that have happened here. There was the Eastland disaster, which is the
Yep.
second greatest boating accident next to, with death count wise, next to the Titanic. There was the Great Chicago Fire. We had the largest theater fire,
Yep.
Oriental here. John Wayne Gacy, like seriously, like John Wayne Gacy was at 33 bodies that were buried under his floorboard.
I remember that.
The Ripper crew, which was a satanic murderous crew in the early 1980s, and one of them recently was released from prison after serving X number of years. So he's in the Chicago area. So it's like all these crazy, creepy things. You know that there's also the story of a Chicago Mothman? Have you heard that?
No, and that sounds awful.
Yes, there's just strange things. So I believe it's like there's been sightings in the west side or the south side, and people call it the Chicago Mothman.
This is amazing. I love how fairy tales are still getting made. Like that is fascinating to me and also terrifying because
it's a weird town. It's a weird and you know, this is home. Like I couldn't fit anywhere after living here.
It makes me think of like I always talk about like my little brother. Like only I can make fun of it. Like people who are not from here, who are not related to me, they can't make fun of it. This is how Chicago is. It's weird, but it's our weird. You know what I mean?
And I get really, really defensive. Like I will defend Chicago like I defend my small children. Like if you know, if someone thinks that I'm coming, like I'm criticizing Chicago, I will defend it to my life because I love this place.
Yeah.
And I will recognize our issues, but I'm going to be the first person that's jumping up and down and shouting about all the beautiful people here. Like this is like I am who I am because of this place. I don't think I would have been as ambitious and as successful if it wasn't for like all of the lessons that this town has taught me.
Put that on the Chicago flag. Make that the Chicago seal, please. Get on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Jennifer. I knew we were going to be talking too much.
I know. Yeah.
No, that's quite all right. It was a great conversation. Don't apologize for that at all. But we do have some questions from the audience, so we want to make sure that we have time to get to those. Cynthia, your friends at Kelvin Park High School are so proud of you. They want you to know that. Many people in the comments are saying that. So,
oh, I love that.
So we do have a question from Josh who says, what advice would you give to aspiring authors and current high school students working towards reaching their individual goals?
Sorry, I got emotional. Okay, Pete, I love you guys. You know, I was Cynthia Rodriguez, class of '98, and I was a lieutenant colonel. So, I mean, as a high school student, there's always going to be distractions. And my biggest issue when I was young was that people didn't understand what my goals were. And there was a lot of criticism. You're gonna get criticism. And I think there needs to be a point where you have to just be very sure of what it is you want to do. And if that means kind of limiting what you share until you get to your goal, then to do so. But I think you just need to be confident in this is your goal and just stick with it. And if you're criticized for it, then so be it. You have to keep continuing forward.
That's great advice. Yeah. Who are some of your favorite Chicago books or Chicago authors?
Who are some of my favorite Chicago? Current ones. Well, Ray Bradbury's Chicago area. He's passed, but if you've ever read any of Ray Bradbury's short stories, I would highly recommend you read his short stories if you're interested in short stories. In terms of like current Chicago writers, Sam Weller, he teaches at Columbia College. He is amazing. He's fantastic. If you also like horror, Daniel Kraus, he's a great writer. I've always enjoyed all of his books. They are terrifying. Emil Ferris, if you like creepy comics, you have to purchase my favorite thing, Things Are Monsters.
So good.
Yeah, yes, I went to school with Emil. Love the school.
So good.
Yeah, she's amazing. So
Tell her I said it was good.
Yeah, I would recommend those.
That's great. Somebody is asking a question that kind of is related to the book, I think. Some statistics claim that as many as 800,000 children go missing each year. Why do you think more is not made of that issue? Shouldn't we be on Amber Alert like every minute?
Yes, we should. And so the poetry collection that I was nominated for the Bram Stoker Award is called Into the Forest and All the Way Through. And I wrote a poem for over 100 missing and murdered women in the United States. I wrote 2 poems per woman. And this issue of missing people is an epidemic. And it happens here in Chicago. There's a Twitter account that I follow that's specific to like missing people in the Chicago area. And this happens so frequently. And I think there needs to be greater awareness and greater protection, especially for children, because there's a lot of bad people out there. And so, yes, I think we need to be shouting it at every moment. I think my recommendations are always have your phone with you, always tell someone where you're going to be, travel in groups, because there's definitely, it's an issue that concerns me greatly.
That's great. We have another question that asks, what are you working on next or now?
I am working on the second novel. Again, it's not a sequel, so sorry. That's just how the book ends. And I wanted to end Children of Chicago on that note because I wanted it to end like a Greek tragedy. And once you read it, you'll understand why. But the next book, I don't want to talk too much about it, but it will be as jam-packed with Chicago history. Chicago will again be a protagonist, and there will be a new monster, and maybe I could fit in that historical information about Camp Douglas into that one. I'll find out, but yeah, I'm excited about. And then a few other like short, another short novel. I have a bunch of re-releases of my old works that I wrote like 10, 12 years ago that I'm trying to re-release and get out as soon as possible in short stories. So
just a few things, that's all. I guess that kind of leads to maybe the last question we have from the audience, which is how do you find the time to write and how do you organize your writing?
So I honestly, it is very horrible to say, and I don't recommend it. I don't sleep much. So I think my mother and my father are like this too. We just don't sleep a lot. I'm also finishing my doctoral degree. I just need my dissertation. So I kind of pick at that when I can. And I hope my dissertation chair is not working because I promise I'm working on my dissertation. But I have a very strange sleep pattern. So I'll sleep like a couple hours in the early evening, wake up, do work for a few hours, and then I go to bed again super late. When super late could be like 3 a.m. So like I'll sleep from like 3 to, yes, it's crazy, don't. So yeah, I'll sleep from like maybe like 7 to 9, then wake up, work from like 9 to X time, and then go back to sleep. It's strange. And I've been trying to get on a regular schedule and I can't. So it's a strange schedule. I don't recommend it. But for the normal person, I would recommend just block off time that's completely devoted for you. Stay away from social media when you're writing. And I have like notebooks like all over the house. There's like a notebook in every like table room. And always have like a pen, and I'm always jotting down notes and ideas because I'll forget things. So.
That's great advice. Maybe though it is good advice to write in the middle of the night if you're writing scary stories, right? That is the scariest time.
I was just sitting here like, oh my God, she's probably up because she's scared. I would be, and I didn't even get to ask. This isn't. Do we have any more audience questions? Because we
don't, but we have a couple of minutes. Ashley, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, what is your favorite scary book?
Oh, The Exorcist.
You said what?
The Exorcist.
Nope. Well, I saw the movie, so I guess the movie scared me. Like we were talking about Ouija boards, I was like, nope. No.
The book is like, that book was the only book I ever had to put down because I felt uncomfortable, and that never happens. Like I am the weird person that I can like, I'll go to like, cemeteries with my friends and let's see if there's anything weird. Like, we're strange people, but when we visit places, I always want to go to the most haunted place to see if there's anything. And so reading The Exorcist, I was like, this is upsetting. Let me put this away for a few minutes. But yeah, I if there was ever any book that I wish I would have written, it would have been The Exorcist.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I thought the movie scared me. So, but now like I'm not immune, but like I've seen it. So I'm like, okay, I know she's gonna do the pea splitting. There's gonna be it's fine. I got it. I was trying to think. I read this. I didn't know really that you could have like sci-fi horror. And so I read this book called The Luminous Dead. It came out maybe a year or two ago. And it's like this woman in a space cave, and there might be ghosts and it might be fungus. Like, we don't know. Oh my God. Why does so much horror has to do with fungus? It cracks me up. Like, I think that's so weird. It's creepy.
I think I'm scared. The main thing I'm scared. I'm just scared of people. Like, I'm scared of like serial killers and people. But if it wasn't that, the only other thing that I'm scared of that's like really super, I'm scared of aliens. Totally. Just the concept of aliens makes me panic. And so like my husband, like if he wants to scare me, like the only thing that will scare me if like he texts me like a picture of like an alien, I'm like, I'm done.
I love that because I'm of the opinion that if aliens come, we're probably in big trouble, but like the general idea of aliens, I don't mind. I like Star Trek and Star Wars, so it doesn't really bother me, but that is so funny. Oh man.
It's strange. Like, spiders. I'm like terrified. Well, I'm scared of spiders too, but like just the concept of aliens, it gives me anxiety. So
I don't like black holes. Like if you ever see like a artist depiction of a black hole, I hate that.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. We really appreciate you being here, Cynthia, and we're so excited. Congratulations on the book's release. It's just out on Tuesday, right? Tuesday. And of course, copies are available at your Chicago Public Library. So go on over to chipublive.org and place your hold and get to reading. I want to say thank you so much to wonderful librarian Ashley Rayner. You can find at the Greater Grand Crossing branch for doing the interview. And we also really want to thank our friends at the Horror Writers Association Chicagoland chapter for their partnership, for their work making tonight's event happen. Thank you so much. You can find out more about everything that they do at hwachicago.org, which is their website, as well as follow them on Twitter. They're at Chicago HWA, so feel free to reach out to them. And I know that they're interested in gathering more fans of horror, more writers of horror, to make horrible things happen. No, horror things happen. Tonight's event was recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing on our YouTube page in just a short period of time. So feel free to tell a friend who missed it. And don't forget to check out our website for information on other upcoming events at chipublive.org. Thanks so much. And I also just want to say thank you for hanging in with us, audience. I know that we had a few tech issues with the sound right at the beginning, so we are sorry for that. What can you do? Technology, right? So thanks for hanging with us. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you, Ashley. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.